Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Supply Chain Talks. In today's sessions, we are going to look at Incoterm rules. This is a very misunderstood topic, and a lot of people lack the clarity and understanding of what the different Incoterms means. But before we look into the different Incoterms, it is important first to understand what exactly are Incoterm rules. In this session, we are going to look at what they are, what they do, what they do not deal in, and how best to incorporate these Incoterm rules. So let's start off by first understanding exactly what Incoterm rules are. Incoterms is an acronym standing for International Commercial Terms. Incoterms is a trademark of International Chamber of Commerce, which is registered in several countries. The Incoterm rules are the world's essential terms of trade for the sales of goods. Whether you are filing a purchase order, packaging and labeling a shipment for freight transport, or preparing a certificate of origin at a port, the Incoterm rules are there to guide you. The Incoterm rules provide specific guidance to individuals participating in the import and export of global trade on a daily basis. Now that we have a basic understanding of what Incoterm rules are, let's have a look at what they do. They provide universal rules that explain a set of 11 of the most commonly used three-letter trade terms. For example, CIF, DAP, EXW, etc. Reflecting business-to-business practice in contracts for the sale and purchase of goods. In addition, they provide clarity and predictability to businesses by describing obligations, that is, who does what as between seller and buyer. For example, who organizes carriage or insurance of the goods, or who obtains shipping documents and export or import licenses. Risk, when and where seller delivers the goods. In other words, where risk transfers from seller to buyer. And the last is cost. Which party is responsible for which cost? For example, transport, packaging, loading or unloading costs, and checking or security related costs. So Incoterms gives us a very good insight about how the costs are shared between the buyer and seller, how the obligations are distributed between buyer and seller, and how and when the risk is transferred from the seller to the buyer. So now let's have a look at what Incoterms do not deal with. The Incoterm rules are not in themselves a contract of sale. Thus, they do not deal with whether there is a contract of sale or not. The specifications of the goods sold, the time, place, method or currency of payment of the price, the remedies which can be sought for breach of the contract of sale, most consequences of delay and other breaches in the performance of contractual obligations, the effect of sanctions, the imposition of tariffs, export or import prohibitions, force majeure or hardship, intellectual property rights, or the method, venue, or law of dispute resolution in case of such breach. The intention of going into so much detail of what Incoterms can do and what they cannot do or they do not deal with is to help the purchasers, the logistics, the supply chain professionals understand and appreciate the importance of Incoterms. But here we cannot stop. We also need to understand how Incoterms can be incorporated, because this is the area where many make mistake And then there's always a confusion on the roles and responsibilities of the buyer and the seller when it comes to the risk, obligation, and cost. So let's have a look at how Incoterm rules can be incorporated. If parties want the Incoterms rules to apply to their contract, the safest way to ensure this is to make that intention clear in the contract. An example would be the chosen Incoterm rules, followed by the named port, place, or point, and then mention the Incoterms 2020. Leaving the air out could cause problems that may be difficult to resolve. In the case of a dispute, the parties, a judge or an arbitrator, needs to be able to determine which version of the Incoterm rules applies to the contract. The place named next to the chosen Incoterm rules is very important. An example for this would be an FOB, freight on board sale, raising doubt about the port of shipment leaves both parties uncertain as to where the buyer must present the ship to the seller for the shipment and the transport of the goods, and as to where the seller must deliver the goods on board so as to transfer risk in the goods from seller to buyer. We can look at another example. In a CPT contract, carriage paid to, if the named place is unclear, this will leave both parties in doubt as to the point to which the seller must contract and pay for the transport of the goods. Thus, it is best to avoid these types of issues by being as geographically specific as possible in naming the port, place, or point, as the case may be in the chosen Incoterm rules. As now we have gone through the basics of the Incoterm rules, let's have a look at the 11 Incoterms. These Incoterms can be segregated into two types. The first set of Incoterm rules deal with all four modes of transportation, that is, rail, road, air, and sea. These rules are EXW, which is Ex-Works, FCA, free carrier, CPT, carriage paid to, CIP, carriage and insurance paid to, DAP, delivered at place, DPU, delivered at place unloaded, DDP, delivered duty paid. These 7 Incoterm rules are for all modes of transportation. Now, there are 4 Incoterm rules which are specific to sea or waterway transport, and they are FAS, free alongside ship, FOB, free on board, CFR, cost and freight, CIF, cost, insurance, and freight. In this session, we have introduced the 11 Incoterm rules. In the next sessions to come, we will look into detail each and every Incoterm rules from 3 perspectives: the cost, obligations, and risk. This ends our session on the introduction of Incoterm rules. Thank you for joining in.